The wind howled across the flat Kansas prairie, dragging the dust along the cracked porch of the humble homestead where Elsie Mae Talbot had lived her entire life. It was the same wind that had rocked her cradle as a baby, carried her small voice across the hayfields, and now pushed against her back as she stood clutching a threadbare sack of belongings. She was being turned out quietly, without ceremony, and with no one to stop it. Elsie was 16 years old, but looked no older than 12. Thin, barely over 5 feet tall, with delicate hands and a fragile gait, she had always been small for her age. Her stepmother, Ruth Talbot, had often said that God made her fun-sized for suffering, and laughed at her own cruelty. After Elsie's father died in a logging accident the winter prior, Ruth wasted no time declaring the girl dead weight. A mouth to feed, too weak to till fields, too fragile to marry off. "I've let you linger too long," Ruth had said that morning, sipping coffee like it was just any other day. "You don't fit in this world, Elsie. I need someone who can work, not wither in the sun. I got 4 boys to raise, and you ain't one of them." Elsie didn't beg. She'd stopped doing that years ago. She merely nodded, gathered her things, and stepped out into the morning without a word. There was no goodbye from her stepbrothers, no protest from neighbors. Small girls without purpose were not uncommon in the West and not often mourned. She walked for miles, sunburn tightening her pale cheeks and her legs shaking from more than just exhaustion. Each step away from the homestead felt like shedding a piece of herself. She had nowhere to go, no kin left to write to. The town of Winnetka, some 10 miles southeast, might have had work for a girl who could scrub floors or churn butter, but she knew what often came with those offers. Elsie had seen other girls taken in, only to vanish in the months that followed. As the afternoon wore on, her feet blistered and her breath grew shallow. Her water skin, half full when she left, had gone warm and nearly empty. The heat made her feel like a thread unraveling with each hour. She made it to a thin line of trees near a creek at dusk, her knees buckling beneath her. She crawled toward the trickle of water, cupped some into her hands, and then collapsed onto the dirt, unable to stand out her last thoughts before slipping into unconsciousness weren't of fear or prayer, but of deep, aching loneliness. She wondered if anyone would find her body, if anyone would even ask. Elsie awoke to the smell of smoke, not fire, but something gentler, like cooked meat over a flame. Her lashes fluttered, vision blurred by sunlight seeping through the canopy of trees. She tried to move, but her arms were pinned under a warm, scratchy blanket she didn't recognize. She was no longer by the stream, but on a bed of moss and furs beneath a lean-to shelter made of thick branches and animal hides. Panic rose in her chest. She sat up too fast, the world spinning. That's when she saw him, a tall man with long, black hair, broad shoulders, and skin the color of dark cedar, crouched over a fire. He wore leather leggings, a tunic, and a necklace of bone and beads. His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. "A Comanche." Elsie gasped and scrambled backward, her voice hoarse and cracked. "Please, please don't hurt me." The man didn't move. He held out his hand, palm up, and said nothing. Elsie waited, heart hammering, expecting violence, but none came. The man instead reached behind him, picked up a wooden bowl filled with some kind of thick stew, and gently set it a few feet from her. Then he backed away, hands still visible. No sudden movements, no threats. She stared at him, then the bowl, then back at him. Her stomach twisted with hunger. Her body ached. But more than anything, her mind reeled with confusion. Why would a Comanche save her when her own kind had cast her out like trash? The man said something in a language she didn't understand. Then slowly, with quiet, respectful steps, he sat down by the fire again and resumed eating. He did not press her, did not question her. For the first time in her life, someone saw her and didn't look away. Elsie took the bowl. Her hands trembled. She was no longer alone. The first night Elsie spent in the forest was fitful. Her body was sore, her mind clouded with fear and disbelief. Despite the food in her belly and the shelter overhead, a lifetime of warnings echoed in her thoughts about savages, about what happened to women taken into the wild, about what became of girls who trusted too easily. She didn't sleep much. She watched him, this quiet, towering man, as he sat cross-legged by the fire, still and patient. When he finally lay down some yards away and pulled a buffalo hide over himself, she stayed awake longer, eyes darting to every sound beyond the men. Lean-to. Every cricket, every hoot of an owl, every snapping twig made her heart race. Yet nothing happened at dawn. She woke to the scent of pine smoke and rabbit stew. The man was already awake, crouched again by the fire, stirring the pot. When he noticed her sitting up, he didn't speak, only nodded toward the food. His face was unreadable, carved with lines of quiet strength, but there was no malice in it. Still wary, she sat up, pulling the blanket tight around her. Her mouth was dry. "You speak English?" she asked, her voice still raspy from dehydration. He tilted his head slightly, then pointed at his chest. "Tahano," he said simply. She blinked. "Tahano," she repeated quietly. He nodded then. He pointed to her. "You?" "Elsie," she whispered. "Elsie May Talbot." His brow furrowed slightly at the long name, then he tried again, slowly. "Elsie." She gave a weak smile and nodded. "That's right, Elsie." Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps approval, or maybe simply understanding. He ladled out some stew into a wooden bowl and passed it toward her, keeping a respectful distance. She accepted it, her fingers brushing the wood, still surprised at the care behind the gesture. She was used to being forgotten at dinner tables, left with scraps, never served first. The rabbit stew was hot, gamey, but good. It filled her belly with warmth she hadn't known in weeks. After breakfast, Tahano rose and left the camp for a while. Elsie debated running, but where would she go? Back to the stepmother who threw her out? To the town that looked the other way? She was still weak, barely able to stand, and the forest was vast and full of dangers. Even if she wanted to run, her legs wouldn't carry her far. When Tahano returned, he had fresh berries in a pouch, a few wild herbs, and a wounded bird nestled in his arm. Elsie's brow knit as he gently set the bird down and began making a splint for its wing using reeds and strips of bark. She couldn't help but whisper, "You're helping it?" Tahano looked up, then nodded. "Small," he said, tapping the bird's side, "but strong." Elsie stared at him, her lips parting slightly. Was he speaking of the bird? Or her? That evening, he gestured for her to help with the firewood, miming the task with exaggerated movements. She rose carefully, still sore, and began gathering twigs and branches. Tahano never criticized, never rushed her. When she dropped a bundle or struggled to carry too much, he simply picked it up and nodded as if to say, "Try again." They worked side by side without words, a strange rhythm developing between them, an understanding built from gestures, glances, and mutual silence. In a world where she was always too small, too weak, or too slow, she didn't feel judged here. Just noticed. As dusk fell, Tahano drew a rough circle in the dirt with a stick. Inside it, he carved lines and patterns, mimicking the sky above. He pointed to a shape and spoke a word in Comanche. Elsie watched with growing curiosity. "What's that?" He repeated the word, slower this time. "Madam star." She tried it. "Madam." He nodded. They sat there beneath the wide velvet sky, trading words, his and hers. She taught him sky, fire, tree. He taught her tika, pawk, and kra, fire, water, and deer. Their voices were low, quiet, reverent. No need to speak loudly when no one was trying to talk over the other. That night, when she lay down beneath the blanket he'd given her, Elsie felt something shift deep within. She was still afraid, but the kind of fear that lingered before a storm passed. The kind that told her maybe she wasn't in danger now, but on the edge of something new, something terrifying and beautiful. For the first time in her life, someone had waited for her to find her voice, and she was beginning to want to use it. Days passed, stitched together by quiet tasks and steady glances. Though neither spoke the other's language fluently, Elsie and Tahano had found a rhythm, a way to exist beside one another that felt more peaceful than anything she had known in. The mornings, Tahano hunted or fished, always bringing something fresh, sometimes rabbit, sometimes fish from the creek, once even a small wild turkey. While he was gone, Elsie tidied the lean-to, swept the ground clear of leaves, and tried to mimic the way he stacked firewood. Her small hands were clumsy at first, but she tried and he noticed. Each evening, they sat across from one another as the fire danced between them. Tahano began drawing pictures in the dirt, again circles, stick figures, animals. He would tap the drawing, say the Comanche word slowly, then point to the object if it was nearby. Elsie, in turn, would offer the English word. "Pock," he said, pointing to the little pot of water heating on the flames. "Water," she replied, nodding. He smiled. "Water," she giggled. Close enough. The lesson became a ritual. At night, the forest would whisper its secrets around them. Owl calls, rustling leaves, the occasional coyote howl, and they would speak in soft tones, trading words like little gifts. One night, as Tahano whittled a piece of cedar with a bone-handled knife, Elsie watched with fascination. His fingers were large and calloused, but moved with an artistry she hadn't expected. Bit by bit, the wood took shape, a small, graceful deer. When he was done, he gently set it in her hand. "Yapeta," he said. "Doe," Elsie blinked, touched by the gesture. "It's beautiful." Tahano simply nodded and tapped her chest. "Yapeta." She stilled. He was calling her a doe. It wasn't an insult, not like the words she'd heard her. Whole life. Weak. Helpless. Frail. In Tahano's eyes, a doe was something elegant. Quiet, yes, but alert. A creature that moved with purpose, even when the world ignored it. Elsie held the carving to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Later that week it rained. The skies turned silver, and a soft downpour soaked the earth. Tahano pulled more hides over their shelter and stoked the fire higher. Elsie sat close to the flames, wrapped in a buffalo skin, her hair damp and clinging to her cheeks to pass the time. She began humming a tune, an old lullaby her mother used to sing when she was very small, before everything turned cruel. Tahano stopped sharpening his spear and listened, head tilted slightly. "You sing," he said softly. Elsie looked up, surprised. "You know that word?" He pointed to his ear. "Here. Before, white people, wagon songs." She smiled. "It's a lullaby for babies," he nodded slowly. "Sounds soft." After a moment of silence, he pointed to the carving she kept tucked near her blanket. "Yapeta sing." Elsie flushed. For the first time in her life, someone said her voice was soft, like it was a good thing, not a weakness. Not something to be spoken over. The rain turned to mist by morning. Everything smelled of wet leaves and clean earth. Tahano taught her how to clean fish, how to set snares for rabbits, and how to recognize edible roots. Elsie listened carefully. The tasks were new to her, but she loved how calm he was when he showed her. There was never any rush. He waited until she was ready. Always. That evening, she made a stew herself. It was watery, but Tahano ate every bite without complaint. Then he surprised her by pulling out a small clay pot she hadn't noticed before, filled with crushed berries. And honey dot, he held it out to her. Sweet, he said. For Yapeta. She blinked fast, tears stinging her eyes. No one had ever saved the sweet part for her. She dipped her fingers in and tasted it. It was delicious, tart, and warm and rich. Thank you, Tahano, she whispered. He nodded again, then tapped her heart gently with one finger. Strong, he said. Not small, strong. She looked at him, really looked. Not just a man of few words. Not just a Comanche in the woods. He was the first person who saw what she could be if only someone gave her the space to grow. For the first time, she no longer felt like someone drifting toward nowhere. For the first time, she wanted to stay. The wind changed that morning. It blew colder, sharper, carrying with it not just the scent of pine and earth, but a feeling, heavy, watching. Tahano rose before sunrise as he always did. But this time, he was quiet in a different way. His movements were slower, more deliberate. His eyes scanned the forest's edge with a kind of practiced caution Elsie hadn't seen before. She noticed it too. The birds had gone still, the usual hum of the forest seemed hushed, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Elsie sat on a log, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Something's wrong, she whispered. Tahano didn't answer at first. He crouched near the fire, turning a stick in the coals without looking up. Then, after a long pause, he said one word in Comanche, his voice low, almost reverent. Ghosts. She tilted her head. You mean spirits? He nodded slowly, then finally met her eyes. Not dead ones, walking ones. He tapped his chest. Mine. Elsie's throat tightened. She didn't press him, but she moved closer, sitting cross-legged across from him. He reached behind him and pulled out a small pouch made of deer hide. Carefully, he untied it and set the contents on the ground. 3 small objects. One was a worn arrowhead. Another, a carved bead shaped like a turtle. The last a strip of cloth with faint bloodstains. Tahano stared at them for a long time before he spoke. My wife's, he said quietly. Elsie blinked. He picked up the turtle bead and passed it gently into her hand. Her name was Tansy. She wore this when she danced. His voice cracked slightly, the name almost fragile as it left his mouth. She's gone? Elsie asked. He nodded. 3 winters ago. Soldiers, Fort Shallow Creek. He didn't say more. She looked down at the bead, tracing the tiny ridges of the turtle shell with her thumb. So small, but carefully made, just like the dough carving he'd given her. It hit her then. Tahano didn't just make things for the sake of art. He carved the world he couldn't speak. He shaped memory into wood. I'm sorry, she whispered. Tahano looked at the arrowhead, turning it slowly in his fingers. We ran, me, Tansy, her sister, small boy. They shot from the trees. He tapped his chest. I got away. They didn't. A deep silence settled between them, heavy as a thundercloud. Elsie's eyes stung. She wanted to say something, anything, but words felt pale in the face of such grief. Tahano reached for the cloth. I carry so I don't forget. But sometimes... His voice faltered. He clenched his jaw. Sometimes it hurts to remember. Elsie understood more than she wanted to. Her own mother had died giving birth to her. Her father, her only true protector, had been crushed beneath a tree while logging in a storm. All she had left were scraps of their stories, pieces of cloth, and the ache of being unwanted, but she'd never carried grief with such strength. She'd only hidden from it. Tahano suddenly stood. Come, he said. She followed him through the trees to a hidden grove she hadn't yet seen. In the center was a ring of stones, arranged carefully. At its heart stood a wooden totem, weathered and worn, carved in the shape of a hawk in flight. Tahano knelt before it. This is my heart, he said, voice soft. He lit a small fire at its base and whispered words she didn't understand. Then he placed the cloth and bead beside the flames, leaving the arrowhead behind. Elsie stood beside him, arms folded tightly. She didn't know the customs, didn't know the language, but she understood enough. She knelt beside him and after a moment reached out and gently rested her hand over his. Tahano didn't move, but he let her stay. After the fire burned down to coals, they walked back to camp in silence. That night, there were no lessons, no carved animals, just the stars and a shared sorrow between them. Before bed, Elsie whispered something into the night. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. Tahano didn't reply, but in the morning, she awoke to a new carving beside her blanket. It was not a deer. It was a turtle, small, steady, and still whole. Elsie wasn't sure when the feeling first crept in this sense that she belonged here. Maybe it was the way Tahano never once told her she was too small for anything. Or maybe it was the way he listened without interrupting, even when Amun. She rambled nervously in English he barely understood. Whatever it was, it settled into her chest like the fire they kept lit each night, quiet, steady, always warm. One morning, she woke up to find Tahano already gone. Not unusual. He often left early to hunt or scout, sometimes gone half the day, but this time felt different. His bow and satchel were still resting against the shelter's frame. He hadn't taken his water pouch either. Worried, Elsie stepped outside and scanned the forest clearing. Then she heard the soft chop-chop of an axe echoing through the trees. Following the sound, she found him in a narrow patch of woods not far from their lean-to. Sunlight spilled through the branches as Tahano stood shirtless, muscles working beneath bronzed skin as he brought an axe down into a thick pine trunk. Sweat clung to his brow and sawdust floated around him like golden dust. Are you clearing land? Elsie asked softly. He looked up and smiled faintly. Then he pointed to the ground behind him, where a rectangle had been marked out in the dirt using stones and stringy bark. Cabin, he said simply. She blinked. Cabin? For you? Tahano shook his head. He stepped forward, crouched slightly, to meet her eyes and touched her shoulder with his calloused hand. For you, Yapeda? Elsie's lips parted, but no words came out. She stared at the rectangle, then at him. Her heart ached in the strangest way, like it couldn't hold what she was feeling. You're building me a house? She whispered. He nodded. Small. House. Warm. Yours. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. No one had ever made her anything. Not a dress. Not a home. Not a place where she could be herself without apology. She had always been asked to fit into someone else's world. Now, someone was shaping a world around her. The following days passed in a rhythm Elsie didn't realize she'd been craving. Her whole life, Tahano chopped wood while she sorted and stacked the smaller pieces. He shaped beams and smoothed planks, using tools he'd either made or bartered for with traders. And always, he carved small flourishes into posts, corners, and door frames. Nothing too elaborate. Just quiet details, like the lines of a leaf or the curve of a deer's hoof. When Elsie asked why he spent so much time making it beautiful, he shrugged and said, because you live in it. The first time they raised a wall together, she stood back and stared in awe. It was small, just 2 short logs high, but it was real. It was hers. On the 3rd day, he began building shelves that were low enough for her to reach. A small cot, made of cedar and elk hide. A table with a rounded edge so she wouldn't bruise her hip. Every part of the cabin was shaped with her in mind. Not just a shelter, but a sanctuary. She watched him measure out window frames using rope and bone markers, working late into the evening. The fire cast shadows across his face, and his expression was deeply focused, but soft when he looked at her. You don't have to do all this, she whispered once, afraid of what it meant to be given so much. Tahano looked at her, then picked up a stick and drew something in the dirt. 2 small handprints side by side. 1 hand cannot build a home, he said. 2 can. Then he placed his hand over hers. By the end of the week, the frame stood. No roof yet, no door, but it stood. And to Elsie, it was more than a structure. It was proof that she could take up space in the world, that someone wanted her there. She walked through the tiny opening where the door would one day hang and turned in a slow circle, her fingers brushing the walls. The wood smelled like pine and rain. She ran her hands across the carved windowsill, delicate. Leaves etched into the grain. "This is mine?" she said aloud. Tahano nodded. "Yes," he said. "Yapeda's home." She didn't cry. She smiled, lips trembling, and whispered, "Then you're always welcome in it." He gave no reply. Just one slow, sure nod. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was beginning. The sound of hammering had become music to Elsie. Every strike of Tahano's wooden mallet against a beam, every creak of the growing cabin felt like proof that she existed, really existed. She hadn't just been cast out. She hadn't disappeared. She was here, on her own square of earth, building something worth staying for. But peace in the wild doesn't go unnoticed forever. It started with tracks. Tahano found them. First deep boot prints near the edge of their clearing. They didn't belong to him or to Elsie. These were sharp-toed, wide-stepped, and fresh. Tahano's face darkened as he crouched beside them, his fingers brushing the dirt. "White man," he muttered. Elsie's stomach knotted. "From Winnica?" He didn't answer. He just scanned the trees, alert and still as a deer sensing a predator. That night, they didn't light a fire. Tahano kept his bow nearby and checked the perimeter twice. Elsie slept with her boots on for the first time since arriving, fear curling under her ribs. 2 days later, they came. 3 men on horseback. One wore a deputy star on his chest. Another had the sour face of Jack Rourke, the town's blacksmith. And the third, a wiry man with sunburned skin, carried a shotgun across his lap. Elsie saw them from the edge of the cabin, where she was sorting bark for the roofline. Tahano stepped in front of her before they were fully in sight. The deputy raised a hand, but his other hovered near his revolver. "Evenin'. We got a report a white girl's been taken by a Comanche." His gaze flicked to Elsie. "Guess?" "We found her." Elsie stepped forward, heart pounding. "I wasn't taken." The blacksmith spat in the dirt. "Sure you weren't, girl? You think we're gonna believe you just ran off and shacked up with a savage?" Tahano's face remained calm, but his posture was stone. He said nothing, his body positioned just enough to block Elsie without seeming threatening. The wiry man cocked his shotgun lightly, enough to make her flinch. "We'll take her now." "No," she cried. "I'm not going with you." The deputy narrowed his eyes. "Miss, do you understand this man is considered hostile by the territory's military scouts? He ain't allowed near settlers." Elsie shook her head, voice trembling. "He saved my life. He didn't steal me. He built this for me," she pointed to the half-finished cabin, "because no one else ever would." Rourke scoffed. "He's a Comanche. Don't matter what he built. You think he won't turn on you? They all do." Tahano spoke then, calm but firm. "I not harm her. She stay because she want." The wiry man snorted. "Funny, he talks now." The deputy dismounted and stepped forward. "Miss Talbot, you are not safe here. It's against regulation for you to reside in Comanche territory unguarded. We're escorting you to town. You can lodge with the church for now." "No," Elsie said again, louder. "You didn't care when I was starving in a ditch. When my stepmother threw me out, no one offered me a bed. No one offered me safety. He did. The deputy's jaw clenched. Then Rourke muttered, "Probably bewitched. Comanche's got ways." Tahano took a step forward, just one, and suddenly all three men drew their weapons. "Stop!" Elsie shouted, holding her hands out. "Don't!" She moved to stand between them. "I swear to God, if you fire at him, I'll throw myself in the way. I'm not going. And if I disappear, if you take me back, you better be ready to explain what really happened when the newspapers come asking. Why, a girl died trying to stay with the only man who ever treated her with decency." Silence, thick and crackling. The deputy looked at her for a long time. Then, finally, he grunted, "Fine, but this ain't over. You step into town again, there'll be questions." With that, he mounted his horse, and the others followed, muttering curses as they rode back toward the tree line. As soon as they were gone, Elsie collapsed onto the ground, shaking. Tahano knelt beside her. "You brave," he said softly. "No," she whispered, tears falling. "I'm just tired of letting people decide where I belong." He reached out, brushing her tear-streaked cheek with his thumb. "You belong here, with me, in what we build." She looked up at the cabin, unfinished, imperfect, but real. "Yes," she said. "That's the first thing I've ever been sure of." The men were gone, but the tension they left behind lingered in the trees like smoke after a fire. Elsie sat by the fire ring that evening, her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes red from crying, not out of weakness, but exhaustion. Tahano sat a few feet away, sharpening a piece of wood with slow, steady strokes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She could feel the questions circling between them. He finally broke the silence. "You spoke brave," she gave a bitter chuckle. "I was terrified. My legs were shaking so bad I thought I'd fall over." "But you didn't." "No, because if they'd taken me, they would have dragged me back to nothing. Back to silence. Back to a world where I don't matter." Tahano nodded slowly, watching the flames. "World has loud mouths, but not loud hearts." Elsie blinked, taken aback by the truth in his words. "You ever feel like you don't belong anywhere?" she asked softly. Tahano didn't answer right away. Then he tossed a twig into the fire. "All the time." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, and stared into the embers. "When I was a boy, my mother called me Namara different. Wind. I asked too many questions. I didn't hunt like the others. I carved. I watched birds, listened. My father said I was too soft, that the world would crush me." He looked at her then. "Maybe it did." Elsie's heart broke for him and for herself. Two people cast out for being something the world didn't value. Not strong in the way others expected. Not loud enough. Not big enough. "You're not soft," she said. "You're just deep." He chuckled. "Deep things look still, but they can drown you." She smiled at that. "So can shallow things if you fall the wrong way." They both laughed then, quiet but real. Tahano reached into a small pouch near his side and pulled out something small. He held it in his open palm for her to see. A tiny heart, carved from red cedar, no bigger than a walnut, strongest part of any creature, he said, "but you can't see it." Elsie took the little heart in her hand. It was warm from his touch, polished smooth and glowing slightly in the firelight. "You made this for me?" He nodded. "So you remember?" "You?" "Don't need big voice, big body, just big heart." Her throat tightened. She turned the carving over in her palm. She had spent her life trying to be seen, trying to be useful, trying to be more. And now here was a man who measured worth in quiet strength. "You could have left me that day," she said. "By the stream. I was half dead." Tahano tilted his head. "You were alone. I know that place." She nodded slowly. "So do I." There was a long pause, the kind that doesn't demand filling. The stars had come out in full by now, freckling the black sky with light. A soft breeze stirred the tall grasses. Elsie took a deep breath and looked across the fire at him. "You don't say much, Tahano, but you see everything. You listen, you build, you make space for people to breathe. No one's ever done that for me." He reached across the fire, slowly, carefully, and laid his hand over hers. "Stay," he said, "not because you need shelter. Stay because you are the shelter." Her lip trembled. "I want to. I really do." "Then you already have." They sat like that, hand in hand, two people who had never truly been chosen before, not for usefulness, not for appearances, but for hard doubt, the kind of love that doesn't roar but roots. That night, as she lay beneath the stars, Elsie didn't just feel safe, she felt claimed. Not in a way that caged her, but in a way that said, "You matter. You are enough. You belong." And as she drifted to sleep, the little cedar heart tucked under her blanket, she whispered one thing to the night: "I'm not too small. I was just waiting for a place the right size to hold me." Summer pressed hard on the land. The air was dry, brittle like parchment. Even the leaves whispered differently in the heat, more urgent, more fragile. Elsie felt it in her bones. Something was coming. The cabin was nearly finished. Only the roof remained. Tahano had spent the week laying cedar shingles he'd traded for, climbing nimbly along the beams while Elsie passed up buckets of nails and small tools. Together, they worked in rhythm, every swing of the hammer a heartbeat of their new life. But one evening, as they sat by the creek washing their hands, the wind shifted suddenly hot and wild. Birds shot from the trees, wings frantic. The scent hit them both at once. Smoke. Tahano rose immediately, eyes scanning the horizon. "Fire," he said grimly. Elsie turned, heart pounding, and saw it. A faint haze of orange flickering just above the tree line, low and fast moving. Which way? To us. They didn't waste time. Tahano grabbed his satchel, quickly stuffed it with flint, tools, food scraps, and the cedar heart he'd carved for her. Elsie raced to the shelter, snatching the turtle bead and the carved dough. She hesitated only a second before tossing in the small piece of honeycomb he'd once saved for her. The first sweet thing she'd ever been given. They ran, but it wasn't. Long before the wind shifted again faster, angrier, a fiery wall tore through the forest behind them, racing like a beast uncaged. Trees crackled and split with loud, terrifying snaps. The sky filled with embers. "Tahano," she screamed. "The town." He paused at the edge of the clearing, eyes fixed toward the low valley where Winnica lay. "Too close," he said. "It'll reach them, but they'll never see it coming from this side." Tahano looked torn. Every instinct in his body told him to stay with her, to get them both to the canyon caves to survive. But his jaw clenched. "I go. They need warning." He turned to her, eyes fierce and unwavering. "You go east. Canyon safe. Follow creek. Wait for me." "No," she cried. "You'll get trapped." "I know these woods," he said, gripping her shoulders. "I move fast." He paused, then reached into his satchel and pressed the cedar heart into her hand. "You keep this. I will come back for it." Elsie was crying now, full-bodied and helpless. "Please, I come back," he said again, and then he was gone, running into the smoke like a ghost. She followed the creek as instructed, heart hammering against her ribs, the smell of fire thick in her lungs. Her legs trembled with every step. She stumbled once, cutting her palm on a sharp rock, but she pressed on. Every fiber in her body screamed at her to turn around, to go back. But Tahano had trusted her to be strong, to live. The canyon came into view just as her knees gave out. She scrambled inside a narrow gap between the stones and collapsed into the dark. The carved heart clutched tight to her chest. She waited, and waited. Night fell, and the sky turned red with flame and ash. Far in the distance, smoke curled over the valley like a serpent. Elsie didn't sleep. She rocked herself in the dark, whispering prayers she barely remembered from childhood. Come back. Come back? It wasn't until late the next day that she heard footsteps, slow, dragging. She scrambled to the edge of the canyon entrance, heart caught in her throat. Tahano? He stumbled into view, his face streaked with ash, a deep cut across his shoulder, but alive. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his chest. He staggered but held her tightly. They're safe, he whispered. I warned them. Help get. The horses out. Fire turned north. Town spared. She pulled back and looked up into his soot-darkened face. You could have died. But I didn't, he said. Because I had reason to come back. He looked down at her hands. She was still holding the carved cedar heart. That reason, he said, pressing his forehead to hers. That night. They sat by a new fire in the canyon's hollow, quiet but unbroken. Tahano's wound was cleaned, wrapped with herbs. Elsie cradled, his head in her lap, brushing soot from his brow. And in that stillness, as the stars blinked back into the sky above them, she finally understood something deeper than words. Love doesn't shout. It doesn't need declarations. Sometimes it just shows up bruised, burned, bleeding, and stays. When the fire had passed and the air no longer choked with smoke, Elsie and Tahano returned to the place that had nearly become their grave and their beginning. The forest was changed. Blackened trees stood like charred bones against the sky. Ash covered the ground in places, soft and gray like winter dust. Animals had vanished. Birds were silent. The wild had burned, but not everything was gone. Tahano led her carefully through the damage, hand always near hers, eyes scanning for danger. He carried his bow again, not because he feared enemies, but because the land was wounded. And in a wounded land, anything could happen. When they reached their clearing, Elsie froze. The cabin still stood. The fire had licked the edges of the clearing but hadn't crossed into it. The trees around it were singed, blackened in places, but the home itself was untouched. The roof was intact. The walls still carried the delicate carvings he had made for her. It stood there like a promise kept. Elsie dropped to her knees, overcome. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, gasping sobs. Tahano knelt beside her, arms gently gathering her in. I thought it would be gone, she whispered. He nodded. So did I. She stood and walked to the doorway, brushing her hand over the smooth wood. It smelled of smoke and cedar, and the air inside was warm, but not ruined. She stepped inside and turned slowly, taking it in. It waited, she said. Aloud, Tahano leaned in the doorway, his shoulder bandaged with herbs and hide strips. It knew you'd come back. They set to work that evening not rebuilding, but restoring, cleaning ash from the windowsills, laying fresh pine across the threshold, rechecking the supports. Tahano showed her how to smoke dry fish again, and Elsie sorted herbs she had collected during the hike back. And then, one morning, something new happened. Elsie woke early, the cabin quiet around her, the air heavy with mist. She stepped outside barefoot, toes curling in the dew. In the clearing she saw movement, a deer, a real one. A young doe, small and alert, grazing at the edge of the woods. Elsie didn't move. She just watched. Tahano came to stand beside her silently. He didn't reach for his bow. He simply watched too. It's like she knew it was safe, Elsie said. He nodded. Some creatures feel it. Peace. They come when the world stops shouting. She turned to him. That's what you gave me. He looked surprised. What? You gave me silence that didn't hurt. You gave me stillness that didn't mean being forgotten. You gave me peace. Tahano was quiet a long moment. Then you gave me something too, a reason to make again, to build. I stopped carving when Tansy died. I only carried tools, not purpose. She reached out and placed her hand over his heart. Then let's never stop building. That night, they placed the final touch on the cabin, a small hand-carved sign above the door made from a flat piece of cedar. On it, Tahano had etched 2 words, one in each of their languages. Yapeda. Hard Elsie traced her finger over the smooth letters. It means dough, she said. He smiled. And you call it hard. We meet in the middle. It wasn't just a cabin now. It was their place in the world. The space where the lost girl and the quiet warrior made something no one else believed possible. Not a marriage of papers. Not a treaty of nations. But a partnership of understanding. She no longer dreamed of running. She dreamed of tending a garden behind the cabin, of raising chickens maybe, of singing lullabies to children who wouldn't be cast aside for being small or slow or gentle. Children who would know that the strength of a heart was measured not in noise or size, but in how fiercely it loved. And for the first time in her life, Elsie didn't just hope for a future. She believed in it. A full season passed, and the land began to heal. The trees near the clearing sprouted pale green shoots from their blackened limbs. Wildflowers peeked through the ash as if daring the earth to hope again. Birds returned, first sparrows, then doves. Even the creek, once choked with smoke and debris, ran clear again, and Elsie, once discarded like something small and unneeded, grew. She woke before dawn each morning now, not because she feared being forgotten, but because there was so much to do, so much worth doing. She milked the goat they'd bartered for. She tended to the herb beds growing wild in the warm soil behind the cabin. And she sang while she worked, not to fill the silence, but to celebrate it. Tahano had cleared a second plot of land nearby, not for crops, but for carving. Every evening, he sat under the tall pine, shaping new pieces, spoons, tiny animals, and occasionally delicate little hearts. One night, he carved a small figure of a woman with a braid down her back and a basket in her hands. He gave it to Elsie without a word. She kept it by her bedside. Sometimes the townspeople came. Not in anger, not anymore. Word had spread about the fire and how it had been Tahano who rode through the smoke to warn Winnica, risking his life for people who once called him Savage. It didn't erase the hatred entirely, but it cracked the wall. The deputy brought supplies once. A girl from the mission offered seed packets. And once, to everyone's surprise, the blacksmith's son delivered a bundle of nails and said quietly, "Pa said it was wrong." What we did, he just never knew how to say it. Elsie and Tahano never asked for praise. They didn't want admiration. They just wanted to be left in peace. And finally, they were. One warm evening, as the moon rose full and round over the treetops, Tahano brought Elsie to a hill overlooking their land. The cabin lights glowed like a lantern below, soft and steady. He took her hand and placed something small in her palm. A ring, not gold or silver, but carved from bone and polished until it gleamed like ivory. Around its edge he'd etched 2 animals, a doe and a turtle. "You're asking me?" She whispered. He nodded. "Not to own you. Not to change you. Just to walk beside you. Always." Tears slipped down her cheeks, quiet and happy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Tahano." They were married in the clearing 2 days later, beneath the same pine tree where she had first seen him carve. There was no preacher, no paper. Just the sky, the earth, and the sacred exchange of vows whispered in English and Comanche. "Tahano," she said, her voice trembling but steady, "you didn't save me, you saw me. And you loved what you saw, even before I did. I will never forget that." He smiled and spoke in his soft, careful way. "Elsie, I was walking alone in my own shadow. But you were like the first sun after winter. I will carry your name in my breath and your heart in my hands." They sealed it with a kiss gentle, reverent, as if everything they had ever lost led them to that single quiet moment. Years later, when travelers passed through the edge of the woods and asked about the little cedar cabin with the carved sign above the door, some townsfolk would smile and say, "That's Yepeda's place, the woman who stayed when the world wanted her gone, the one the Comanche warrior built for. They made something there, something the fire couldn't take." And children would whisper tales of the small, kind woman with the braid and the man who carved stories into wood. They would never know the whole truth, that once a girl no one wanted was given not just a home but a heart, and in the wild, scarred place the world had forgotten, she became unforgettable.